The elderly often say, knock 3 times, not 4. If someone knocks on your door 4 times at midnight, absolutely do not open it, because it's very likely not human. On the night my older brother was born, the dogs and cats in the village were barking and meowing incessantly until 4 knocks sounded on our door, and then they all fell silent. In the end, my brother was still born safely, but that was also when the nightmare began to descend upon my family. My name is Vệ Thanh. This name was given by my father after he passed away. To be honest, at first I didn't dare believe it either. Before I knew about these things, I only knew I was called Quy Hoa Tu, Ghost Child, a name the villagers gave me because I was born into a family that made anyone who mentioned it tremble with fear. The story has to start from my mother carrying a monstrous fetus. My mother was pregnant 4 times in her life, but lost the child 3 times. During her first pregnancy, the whole family was overjoyed. Not a day went by without chicken soup and nutritious dishes. But my mother's belly remained large for 11 months. When she went to the hospital for a checkup, they extracted a fetus that had been dead for 4 months. That fetus had sharp, pointed hands and a small snout, to the extent that even the doctor exclaimed, "This child looks just like a stubborn little tiger." By the second pregnancy, the fetus suddenly died in the womb at 7 months. This time, when it was extracted, both the doctor and the family were horrified. The baby had a body covered in pure white fur, no head, and even had a tail growing from its rear. From then on, my grandmother took my parents to pray and make offerings day and night, traveling everywhere, believing in folk healers, sorcerers, and masters. Among these people, some demanded exorbitant prices and then disappeared. Others, upon hearing the story, refused to help outright. The fakes dared to take the money, while those who truly had ability seemed to see something that frightened them. No matter how much money was offered, they didn't dare help my parents. This cycle repeated, and soon enough, my mother was pregnant for the 3rd time. The whole family gave their all, staking everything on this child. From the moment she became pregnant, my mother was taken to the city, to the best hospital, to give birth in the safest and most professional environment. The child was born smoothly. That was my older brother. He was born healthy, with all limbs intact, and only then did the whole family breathe a sigh of relief. But no one expected that, compared to the first 2, my brother was the true monster. During the day, he didn't cry or fuss, was obedient and well-behaved, considered the cutest, chubbiest baby in the village. But at night, he developed a peculiar fondness for the chickens at home. Ever since he learned to crawl, he would often sneak into the chicken coop at midnight, bite live chickens to death, not eating the meat, but only drinking the blood. Soon, all the chickens at home were killed by him. Sometimes, he even sneaked over to bite the neighbors' chickens. The villagers gossiped and whispered about this, cursing my mother as a strange woman who gave birth to a monster. My father once wished my brother would just die and be out of his sight, but after losing 2 children before, he had already suffered too great a shock. So he could only pray that my brother could grow up safely, so the family line would have someone to continue. Because of this, he chained my brother in a room, not allowing him outside. However, ever since my brother was chained in the room, strange things started happening at home. Every night, late into the night, the sound of a woman talking to herself would emanate from my brother's room. But when my parents went in to check, they only found my brother lying there, who would then lift his head and look at them with a strange smile. This terrified my parents. They sought out a fortune-teller named Lưu from the next village, and even went to a temple to ask a Taoist master for help. But when they described my brother's condition, they were ruthlessly refused. Finally, with no other options, my parents gradually lost hope. They decided to let my brother fend for himself in that dark room. But what they never expected was that my brother not only didn't starve to death but grew healthier. The sound of the woman in my brother's room at night also became more frequent, even calling my mother's name, cursing that she would die without heirs. At first, my whole family was tormented by this strange child to the point where life was worse than death, living each day in fear. But as time passed, my parents grew accustomed to that abnormal life. After all, he was their own flesh and blood. They could only pray that when he grew up, he would become a normal person. However, heaven does not always grant human wishes. The year my brother turned 2, on a stormy, windy night, he bit through the rope and disappeared. My father searched everywhere from one end of the village to the other, even in the nearby mountains and forests, but couldn't find him. Later, my family went to find the fortune-teller, Mr. Liu, in the next village, asking him to use divination to find my brother. Divination is a method used by fortune-tellers to find missing people. They only need to know the missing person's birth date and time, and based on that, they can predict the direction they went and the time they disappeared. Mr. Liu said that my brother left home during the hour of the rat, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., the previous night, heading east for 5 miles. Following Mr. Liu's directions, my father went to the forest 5 miles east of our house and found a deserted shrine. The shrine gate was locked with a rusty iron chain as thick as a wrist. Everyone in the village knew this forest was a forbidden area for the whole region. Since birth, the elders had strictly forbidden us from entering because anyone who entered the forest would surely die. But to find a son, my father defied the taboo, mustering all his courage to break the chain on the deserted shrine. Inside, my father indeed found my brother's corpse. His mouth was stuffed with paper money, and his face still bore that strange smile. This sight drove my father mad. He lay in bed delirious for over a month. My mother even paid to have people investigate the cause of my brother's death. The investigation results came quickly. They said my brother stuffed the paper money into his own mouth, walked 5 miles by himself to the deserted shrine, but the cause of death was unclear to anyone. After giving a brief report of a few sentences, the investigators immediately packed their things and fled the village, as if running for their lives. Who could believe that a 2-year-old could walk 5 miles by himself and then die in a shrine that even adults could hardly access? This story quickly spread through 10 villages and 8 hamlets, instantly becoming a horror topic in after-dinner conversations. From then on, the mystery surrounding the deserted shrine was endlessly exaggerated. People would rather detour 100 miles than get half a step closer to that shrine. The villagers' gossip about my family only increased. Some even said my mother was full of evil energy, didn't uphold her wifely duties, and that my brother was the son of the yellow-grayed immortal, a fox spirit. If not, why did he only target chickens? But things didn't completely end there. My parents often had the habit of working in the mountains until late before returning home, and every time they passed the forest behind the mountain, they would hear my brother's voice calling out to them faintly from within the forest. At first, they thought they misheard, but gradually, the two of them realized something was wrong. From then on, they didn't dare go up the mountain to work anymore, nor did they mention having more children. No matter how my grandmother tried to persuade them, my parents firmly refused. Seeing the situation couldn't continue like this, my grandmother went up the mountain to visit my long-deceased grandfather's grave one last time. After returning, she took a bamboo basket and went begging through 10 villages and 8 hamlets, gathering 240 local chicken eggs, then took them to the Half-Immortal Lưu in the next village for help. People said Half-Immortal Lưu was a living bodhisattva, capable of defying fate and altering destiny, turning the tides of yin and yang. But his profession had also cost him 2 wives and 5 children, due to revealing too many heavenly secrets. He had long since retired, no longer practicing this trade, only occasionally helping others with minor things like calculating good and bad days. Asking him to alter fate was almost impossible. However, the 240 chicken eggs were seen as a rule he had set before. If all these eggs were rolled over his body and the egg whites that flowed out were perfectly clear, he would break his rule and intervene once. Just like with others, Half-Immortal Lưu patiently rolled each egg my grandmother brought. But strangely, the egg whites were not only not clear, but some were even black as ink. This not only horrified my grandmother, but also frightened Half-Immortal Lưu himself, who told her, "Your family has offended a master whom no one dares to touch. Don't come find me again." That night, my grandmother, filled with grief and indignation, committed suicide right in front of the deserted shrine's gate. My parents also gradually realized that behind the fate of frequently giving birth to strange children, there must be some terrifying secret. After her death, my parents didn't dare stay in that village for another minute. They hastily buried her, packed their luggage, and left the village that very night. That night, as if heaven had no pity, they encountered a heavy rain on the deserted mountain road. My parents had no choice but to find a nearby mountain cave to take shelter from the rain. But unexpectedly, in the darkness, they encountered a woman of peerless beauty. That woman was as beautiful as a fairy who had descended to earth, her stunning appearance beyond description. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Grew a Tail. This place was desolate without a soul in sight, with no villages or roadside stalls nearby. Meeting someone in a mountain cave was already strange, let alone such a beautifully dressed, elegant woman from the city. My parents were stunned on the spot, but when they collected themselves, they discovered the woman was pregnant, her lower body covered in blood, looking extremely weak, as if on the verge of death. My mother, seeing this, panicked and told my father to quickly avoid them because this was a woman in difficult labor. Immediately after, without having time to ask where she came from or why she chose to give birth in this deserted mountain wilderness, my mother used everything she knew to stop the bleeding and help deliver the baby. At that time, my mother was only in her early 20s with little experience and had to fumble around for a long time before finally stopping the bleeding for her. When the woman recovered, she seemed immensely grateful to my mother. But strangely, when my mother felt the baby was about to be born, the woman adamantly refused to let my mother continue helping. She pushed my mother away, then tried to hide in a corner of the cave, covering her body with clothes. Even so, she forced a stiff smile, said it was okay, and deliberately changed the subject by chatting with my mother. My mother thought perhaps she was shy, so she didn't insist on helping. After chatting for a while, the woman revealed that she was from Mount Thanh Khâu. After becoming pregnant, she was unfortunately sold by bad people to this place. She had barely managed to escape into this cave. She said she was severely injured, feared she wouldn't survive, and begged my mother for one thing. She pleaded with my mother that if she didn't make it, to take her child back to Mount Thanh Khâu and find a man named Q Thien Keep. This person was her husband, and if found, he would surely be grateful to my parents, granting them wealth and glory for life and protecting my family for generations to come. These words, in the context of that time, were no different from something only a fortune-teller or a spirit medium would dare say. My mother felt it was strange and told her that the bleeding had stopped and she wouldn't die. But the woman seemed not to understand my mother's words, just incessantly pleading, crying miserably, begging my mother to promise to help her. Unable to comfort her, my mother had no choice but to nod in agreement. However, my mother couldn't bear to stand by and watch someone die without helping, so she intended to go closer to help with the delivery. But this action was strongly opposed by the woman, as if she was hiding something inconvenient to say, not letting my mother get close. Seeing her so determined, my mother had no choice but to watch from a distance. A moment later, the woman seemed to have given birth, but the baby's cry was extremely strange. Instead of the wailing of a newborn, the sound was exactly like the barking of newborn puppies in a household. However, at that time, my mother was only worried about the woman's condition and didn't think too much about it. Since the woman was still hiding in the corner and wouldn't let my mother look, my mother called my father in to sit at the cave entrance and keep watch, occasionally talking to the woman to make sure she was still alive. By midnight, the woman began pleading with my parents again, earnestly requesting that they must take the child to Mount Thanh Khâu to find its father. Strangely, she still held the child tightly, not letting my parents see it. Her voice grew weaker, but she tried to act as if nothing was wrong, not allowing my parents to approach. After my parents promised repeatedly that they would do it, the woman thanked them profusely, then said she felt tired and wanted to rest, asking my parents not to come near her anymore. My parents, being honest and simple, didn't think of other strange possibilities. Seeing her condition wasn't too critical, they felt reassured and went back to sleep. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. The woman had disappeared. In her place, in the corner of the cave where she lay the night before, was the corpse of a female fox, with 3 fox pups nestled against her, making weak little cries, crawling around looking for their mother. My parents almost fainted from fright. They stood frozen, staring at the scene before them, taking a long time to regain their senses. Mountain people have been accustomed to hearing strange tales since childhood, as their elders often told them. But a story like this, if spoken aloud, would certainly be taboo. After discussing, my parents initially intended to leave the cave immediately. But when they saw those 3 adorable fox pups, my mother's hidden compassion stirred. My mother said to my father, "None of our children survived. We know how painful it is to lose flesh and blood. Whatever it is, it's a pitiful mother. Last night we already promised. How about, out of pity for it, we return its children?" My father, inherently kind-hearted, almost hesitated before nodding in agreement. So my parents buried the mother fox, then took the 3 little foxes and went everywhere asking about Mount Thanh Khâu. Strangely, this place my parents had never heard of. Most people also said they had never known of it. Finally, they found a clue from an old fortune-teller by the roadside, who gave them directions. After a month and a half, crossing mountains and forests, taking a winding path, they finally carried the 3 little foxes to the deserted, uninhabited Mount Thanh Khâu area. However, they never encountered the father of the 3 little foxes. While searching, resting their feet in a cave, they fell asleep. When they woke up, the 3 little foxes had disappeared. At the cave entrance was a pile of gold, silver, jewels, and a piece of paper. On the paper was written, "Kneeling in gratitude for the great kindness of you two. After 5 evils, we will repay the debt of gratitude." Just that one sentence, with no further explanation, left my parents utterly confused about what had happened. From then on, they felt dazed every day, unsure if they had experienced a dream or reality. Or rather, in their hearts, this was a bizarre experience that, if told, would surely be condemned as superstition. They didn't want to mention it, only hoping to bury it in their hearts forever. Being born in the countryside, my parents had heard many strange mountain forest stories, so they believed that the gold and silver were Een objects, wealth belonging to the Een world, not to be touched. Therefore, they hastily buried the treasure chest in the cave, then fled Mount Thanh Khâu, as if running away. After that, my parents wandered adrift for a long time. They suffered hunger and hardship, sleeping rough, despised by others, even spat upon. Life was so difficult that in the end, they were forced to return to their hometown, continuing to live those bleak, arduous days. Unexpectedly, not long after, my mother accidentally became pregnant again, and that fetus was me. Just like my 3 older brothers before me, I was not born smoothly. My mother carried me for a full 18 months. 18 months, not 1 month less. My mother didn't dare let anyone know about this, afraid outsiders would mock our family again. Without a doubt, her pregnancy with me was also not peaceful. Ever since I was in her womb, every month on the night of the full moon, my mother would suddenly go mad. Sometimes she wanted to hang herself. Other times she wanted to take a knife and slit her own belly, as if possessed by a ghost. Each time, my father managed to stop her in time. The next morning, when she woke up, my mother would tell my father that the night before, a woman was standing outside the door calling her name, cursing that she would die without heirs. At first, my father didn't pay much attention, thinking my mother was affected by the previous shocks, perhaps suffering from a mental disorder. But every month, on the night of the full moon, my mother would have another episode, making my father start to feel something was wrong. He also feared that the fetus in her belly was related to the previous 2, and any slight negligence could cost both mother and child. My father originally had to work hard to support the family, but now he couldn't ensure the safety of my mother and the unborn child day and night. With no other choice, he swallowed his pride and took my mother to see the fortune-teller Half-Immortal Lưu in the next village again. It seemed Half-Immortal Lưu had known in advance that my parents would come find him, as he had already written a note and left it in front of his door, advising my parents to go as far away as possible and never come back to find him. Seeing the words on the note, my father became even more convinced of his suspicion that there must be some terrifying reason behind my mother's inability to give birth to a healthy child. He couldn't bear to lose both mother and child again. To save me and my mother, my father was determined to beg Half-Immortal Lưu to intervene once. From that day on, my father knelt in front of Half-Immortal Lưu door, regardless of wind or rain, vowing he would not leave even if he died. My father knelt like that until he truly died right in front of Mr. Liu's door. Even my mother couldn't pull him away. Before breathing his last, my father only begged Half-Immortal Lưu to use his own life in exchange for a way out for his wife and child. Having lost 3 children, my mother at that time had little hope left in life. Wanting to leave something for my father, after burying him, she went and knelt in front of Half-Immortal Liu's door again. This time, my mother had only knelt for less than 2 hours when Half-Immortal Lưu, an old man over 80, came out with tears in his eyes. He helped my mother up, sighed, and said a sentence full of pathos. "It truly is a karmic misfortune. Do you really want to drag an old man like me down to hell with you?" After that, Half-Immortal Lưu took my mother's birth date and time, then told my mother to wait outside. He went inside, and was busy until almost evening. My mother stood outside, only hearing the continuous sound of bamboo slips falling to the ground from inside the house. When he came out, Half-Immortal Lưu gave my mother a piece of paper filled with dense writing and a string of ancient copper coins tied with a red thread. After giving these things, he adamantly refused to let my mother stay, telling her to take them and leave immediately. My mother, though she only studied up to the 3rd grade, was diligent in learning and could read and understand. When she returned home, she immediately opened the note from Half-Immortal Lưu. The first line on the paper wrote, "Before the divination, it is already known. This is the hatred of the father's generation, repaid to the son's generation. About 30 years ago, your father killed an entire den of foxes. They are descendants of the Hojia, one of the 5 immortals of the Northeast. If you don't know about this, you must know about your 2 older brothers or sisters who died abnormally. If so, continue reading. If not, pack your belongings and leave this place. Leave everything to fate." My mother trembled so much, she nearly dropped the paper. Half-Immortal Lưu was not wrong by a single word. My mother's father, my maternal grandfather, was a hunter when he was alive. Whether he killed foxes or not, my mother didn't know, but it was true that she once had 2 older brothers who hung themselves and died in the forest. After that, my grandfather, not knowing what retribution he encountered, also passed away, leaving my young mother to live alone. To survive, my mother became a child bride for my father's family, and from then on, the subsequent story unfolded. Seeing Half-Immortal Liu's calculations so accurate, my mother hurriedly continued reading. "Burning incense for the living." However, the second line on the paper confused my mother greatly. "Immediately tie the coin string I gave you to the leg of the bed where the person sleeps. Before giving birth, do not wash or change anything on the body, nor change clothes. At night, no matter what sounds you hear outside, absolutely do not go out. Tomorrow morning, when you hear livestock calls, immediately take incense to my door and light 1 stick. You must kneel while lighting it." The content of this line made my mother even more bewildered. She read on and found that the rest was filled with strange, tangled symbols like annotations, which she completely couldn't understand. Because my father had just passed away, my mother was so grief-stricken, she couldn't calm down. That night, she couldn't sleep at all, just sat missing my father all night. At midnight, a woman's voice suddenly sounded outside the door. "Wife of the V family, I want to come in and talk to you. Do you agree to let me in?" This voice was very familiar to my mother. It was the voice of the woman who often called my mother during late nights after she became pregnant with me. My mother was timid, so frightened she curled up in bed, trembling and crying silently. She had heard since childhood that unclean things wanting to enter a house must have the owner's consent, so my mother didn't dare respond. However, the voice outside the door kept repeating, calling incessantly. No matter how tightly my mother covered her ears, the sound was like a curse, lingering by her ears. It wasn't until the rooster crowed that the outside suddenly fell silent. By the time my mother stretched her legs out, the sky was already bright. As dawn broke, my mother, having not slept all night, mustered her courage and went to Half-Immortal Lou's door, lighting a stick of incense in front of it, as instructed in his letter. But just as my mother was about to stand up, an old man's voice came from the end of the road. "Wife of the V family, what are you doing?" My family's surname is V, so people from several surrounding villages called my mother that. My mother turned to look. It was Old Man Lai, the village chief, also the eldest in the village. At that time, my mother was mentally distraught. She just bowed her head and said that Half-Immortal Liu told her to do it. Old Man Lai heard this. His face immediately changed color. He stepped closer, stared at Half-Immortal Liu's gate for a long time, and finally, his face pale, he sat down with a thud. Burning incense is for the dead. How can there be such a thing as burning incense for the living? Wife of the V family, you've brought disaster. Old Man Lai said this while continuously stepping back, even throwing away the hoe he was carrying, then stood up and ran away like a madman, disappearing without a trace. My mother didn't understand what was happening. At that time, she was just a woman in her early 20s. How could she withstand such terror? She immediately knocked on Half-Immortal Liu's door, but no matter how she knocked, there was no answer from inside. It seemed Half-Immortal Liu wasn't home. Finally, my mother, terrified, ran home and spent the whole day in restless anxiety. As soon as dusk fell, my mother sat in the living room, chin in hands, crying until her tears dried. She missed my father and was afraid the woman would come find her again at night. Thinking like this, my mother dozed off. In a half-awake, half-asleep state, she heard a voice from the ancestral altar, like my father's voice. To my mother's name, Half-Immortal Liu has come to find me. He told me to tell you something. He said your father killed a den of fox spirits, so they bear a grudge and killed your father and 2 older brothers. But the resentment has not dissipated. They have found you, wanting to make our V family line extinct. Half-Immortal Liu said, if his calculations are not wrong, our child must be carried for 18 months to be born, and it can only live until 18 years old. If you don't want to wait until the child turns 18 and then have to part with your flesh and blood, either don't give birth to it and come down to be with me, or wait until the child's full month. You must find 2 succumbing here, meaning virgin hens, blindfold them with red cloth, then go to Mount Thanh Khâu to find a wife for the child. In this region, people often call chickens succumbing. Succumbing here means hens that have never laid eggs. Half-Immortal Liu said, you must place the succumbing and our child together. You kneel in front of the child, not allowed to lift your head to look. If you hear the succumbing cry, then you look. The creature eating the succumbing is the child's future wife. You must be mentally prepared. Whether it's a wild boar, a stray dog, a snake, or an insect, you are not allowed to drive it away. You must bring both it and the child back home. I've already thought of a name for the child. Call it Vệ Thanh, meaning virtuous youth. Haha, you take a notebook and record these things. Wait until the child's 18th birthday. Tell them to go to the shrine where the second child lost his life that night to see a gift. That fox spirit carries deep resentment. I'm afraid it will try every means to come back for you. If not, after you finish your tasks, I will come to take you away. At this point, my mother jolted awake and opened her eyes wide. So it was just a dream. But as my mother was panting, drenched in sweat, a voice from the direction of the ancestral altar sounded again, my father's voice. That's right. Tomorrow go help bury Half-Immortal Liu. Bury him in front of that shrine's gate. Remember to write it in the notebook. Later, tell the child when they grow up to dig up the grave and bring Half-Immortal Liu's remains back to the village cemetery for reburial. That clear voice made my mother tremble all over with fear. She called out to my father from the direction of the ancestral altar, but soon after, exhausted, she fainted. This incident terrified my mother endlessly. She thought her spirit was disturbed from missing my father too much. At first, she didn't pay too much attention, until the next day. Old Man Lai unexpectedly came to the house to report that Half-Immortal Lưu had died, hanging himself behind his door. Half-Immortal Lưu left a suicide note, entrusting his funeral affairs to my mother to handle. Hearing Old Man Lai say this, my mother collapsed to the ground, speechless. From that day on, my mother became like a mute, no longer uttering any words. Everyone in the village spread rumors that Half-Immortal Lưu death was caused by my mother. They thought this was unlucky, so no one dared to lend a hand. In the end, my mother herself had to carry Half-Immortal Lưu corpse to the front of the deserted shrine and dig a grave to bury him. Time flew by, and a year quickly passed. Throughout that year, whenever night fell, the voice of a woman would regularly sound outside our door, constantly asking my mother if she agreed to let her in. My mother knew it was an unclean thing that had come. But Half-Immortal Lưu was dead. She had no way to deal with it. Day after day living in extreme fear, finally, my mother went mad. My mother no longer spoke to anyone but often muttered to herself. Whenever night fell, if someone passed by our house, they would hear my mother talking nonsense inside the dark house, where not a single light was turned on. This once caused many village children to cry in fear. Everyone thought my mother, having lost her husband and children, couldn't bear the pain and had gone insane. Although my mother had become a madwoman, she didn't forget any of the tasks my father had entrusted to her. Despite her unstable mental state, my mother did not neglect caring for the child in her womb. After countless hardships, she finally gave birth to me. When I was 1 month old, my mother followed my father's instructions, found 2 virgin hens, blindfolded them with red cloth, and took me up Mount Thanh Khâu. That night, my mother placed me and the 2 virgin hens in front of the cave entrance, knelt down in front of the cave, bowing her head and muttering words no one could understand. In the silence of Mount Thanh Khâu, the silver moonlight cast over the scenery, the dark cave entrance exuding a terrifying aura. Everything within sight was bizarre beyond description, but my mother showed no fear. At midnight, one of the 2 hens suddenly let out a mournful cry, tearing through the deathly still atmosphere. When my mother lifted her head to look, she saw a small wild dog biting the hen's neck. Strangely, my mother was kneeling right in front of it, where the hen was bitten, yet before the hen cried out, the surroundings were completely quiet, without even the sound of wind. Any small sound, she would have heard it. But my mother didn't understand how the wild dog could appear before her without leaving any trace. Many years later, when reading my mother's notes, I learned that she described it as a young wild white wolf. Strangely, this white wolf was not afraid of my mother and showed no malicious intent. It ate the succumbing while frolicking in front of my mother, as if smiling at her. Chapter 4. The Magpie Announcing Good News. At that moment, my mother suddenly understood that this was probably the future daughter-in-law people talked about. So, she decided to wait. After the white wolf finished eating the first hen, it didn't touch the second one. Instead, it licked my mother's hand, and then licked the cloth wrapping me. The wolf seemed impatient, constantly shaking its head towards the foot of the mountain, as if urging my mother to leave this place quickly. But just then, a strange sound came from the pitch-black forest. The white wolf immediately bared its teeth, growling to protect my mother. Just a few seconds later, a white creature shot out from the forest. That thing seemed to have a deep grudge against the wolf, charging straight at it, and the two tangled together, biting and fighting. My mother looked for a long time before recognizing it as a small snow fox. Although overpowered by the white wolf, the small snow fox was very brave, fighting relentlessly. Both animals were small but fierce, fighting as if wanting to kill the other. The scene stunned my mother. Both were very cute yet fierce, like angry children. Soon, the little fox gradually lost ground and was in danger of being killed by the white wolf. But just as the little fox could no longer fight back, another large white shadow shot out from the forest. It was a giant fox, larger than a wolf. More frighteningly, its eyes glowed white, and behind it trailed a cluster of thick tails, So many they were uncountable. The large fox didn't join the fight, but just sat quietly observing. The white wolf seemed extremely afraid of this fox, as if it had met its natural enemy. It turned to my mother and let out a few urgent barks, then hurriedly ran away. When the wolf left, the injured little fox seemed very happy, jumping around the multi-tailed fox a few times, then ran around my mother. Finally, it cleverly lay down next to the cloth wrapping me, incessantly licking me through the cloth. At this point, my mother realized the little fox wasn't fighting the wolf over the hen. The multi-tailed fox sat quietly for a moment, then silently left. My mother didn't know what to do, panically carrying me away from that place. But strangely, when she carried me away, the little fox picked up the remaining live hen and obediently followed my mother. No matter how she tried to drive it away, it refused to leave. Finally, my mother seemed to understand something. She vaguely thought that this fox might be one of the 3 that she and my father had brought back last year. Seeing the little fox so determined not to leave, she helplessly took it home. The little fox was very mischievous, constantly jumping around. After coming home, it also behaved very strangely. From the living room, it ran into every room by itself, going through every nook and cranny. The house, originally gloomy and filled with a cold aura, suddenly seemed infused with a new vitality, becoming unusually lively. Ever since the little fox entered our house, everything began to change. One night, the woman's voice called outside the door again, calling my mother. "Wife of the V family, I want to come in and talk to you. Do you agree to let me in?" The little fox didn't hesitate at all. Upon hearing it, it bared its teeth and growled towards the outside. Finally, it fiercely rushed out of the house through the dog door. When the little fox ran out, the woman's voice suddenly fell silent. When it returned home, my mother saw it holding a clump of bloody fur in its mouth. At a glance, my mother knew it was fox fur, but definitely not from this little fox. The matter didn't stop there. The next night, the woman appeared again. But this time, she not only asked if she could come in but also shouted from outside the door. "Wife of the V family, there's something very strange in your house. Open the door and let me in. I'll help you drive it away." Ha ha ha. This time, as soon as the little fox bared its teeth and growled, a man's angry roar suddenly sounded outside. "Get lost." The shout echoed like thunder, full of the authority of a strong man's anger. After that, my mother heard the woman's miserable scream. From then on, her voice was no longer heard during late nights. The house, once haunted by strange occurrences for several years, finally seemed to return to normal. However, not long after, my mother discovered some other strange things. My mother noticed that ever since the little fox appeared, I began to lose interest in milk. Sometimes I wouldn't drink it, other times I seemed uncomfortable. But even without drinking milk, my belly was strangely bloated every day, until one night,